What if I told you that the very thing you've been taught to crave, to celebrate, and to chase, falling in love, is not a blessing but a curse? Today, we'll tear apart the illusion of romance and uncover why falling in love may be the dumbest, most self-destructive decision you can ever make. If you've ever wondered why love brings more suffering than joy, this will be your answer. Love presents itself as the most enchanting force in human life. It whispers to us that we are incomplete until we find another, that our existence lacks meaning without the embrace of a chosen one. From the songs sung by ancient poets to the novels that fill modern shelves, love is painted as a divine gift, a sacred mystery, or even the ultimate purpose of life itself. But what is rarely admitted is that behind this glittering mask lies something far more sinister. Love is not a blessing, but a trap. It is not the creation of reason or free will, but the cunning design of nature itself, whose only true concern is the perpetuation of the species, not the happiness of the individual. When you fall in love, you believe you are making a choice. You look at a person and tell yourself that you are drawn to their beauty, their kindness, their uniqueness. You think it is you who decides, you who desires, you who is in control. But in reality, you are not the master of this experience. You are its prisoner. The forces that drive you toward another are not born from your rational mind, but from instincts buried deep within, instincts that predate your existence, that care nothing for your peace, and that see you only as a vessel to achieve reproduction. The very intensity of your longing, the feeling that you cannot live without this person, that you would sacrifice anything to be with them. This is not love, but nature's manipulation at its finest. Consider the way passion blinds even the wisest of men, a philosopher who can penetrate the deepest mysteries of thought, a statesman who can outwit rivals and command nations, a warrior who can stare fear in the face. None of them are immune. When love takes hold, their brilliance crumbles. They abandon reason, forsake caution, and become willing slaves to the object of their desire. They write poetry, they empty their coffers, they sacrifice their dignity, believing themselves noble in devotion. But what truly moves them is not nobility, nor reason, but the cold arithmetic of biology has calculated in silence that this union may produce the strongest offspring. And when the intoxication fades, the man awakes to realize that he has paid with his freedom, his wealth, his time, and often his peace of mind. If love were truly about joy, would it be accompanied by such misery? The yearning of the heart in separation, the jealousy that consumes in suspicion, the despair that follows rejection. These are not the marks of a blessing, but of a cruel game. Nature raises you to ecstasy, makes you believe you have touched the divine, only to plunge you into torment when her purpose is fulfilled or denied. What you thought was the key to happiness becomes the source of your deepest suffering. The lover, trembling in fear of losing their beloved, is not free. He is in chains, more tightly bound than any prisoner. His thoughts circle endlessly around one object. His days are dictated by another's whims, and his very identity becomes swallowed in the illusion of union. This is not love, but enslavement disguised as passion. The most tragic aspect of this trap is how thoroughly it deceives its victims. For unlike hunger or thirst, which are plainly biological needs, love disguises itself as something spiritual, transcendent, unique. It convinces you that your beloved is unlike any other in the world, that the connection you feel is eternal, that you have found your other half. This illusion is so powerful that people will sacrifice everything for it. Their careers, their reputations, their friendships, even their lives. Yet when the veil is lifted, when time erodes the intoxication, the beloved becomes as ordinary as any stranger, and the spell is broken. What once seemed divine now appears trivial, and what once felt like destiny is revealed as chance. We call this experience falling in love, and perhaps the word, falling, is more accurate than we realize. For to fall is to lose balance, to descend, to collapse under a force greater than yourself. And indeed, love pulls you down, away from reason, away from freedom, into a state where you no longer govern yourself. The mind becomes servant to the body, and the will becomes chained to desire. You are not uplifted, lowered, not liberated, but captured. And yet you celebrate your captivity, you call it happiness, when in truth it is the surrender of everything that makes you whole and independent. Nature, in her silent cunning, does not care if you are happy. She does not care if you suffer, if you are betrayed, if your heart breaks, or if your life collapses under the weight of passion. Her concern is only that the species continues, and love is the bait she uses to trap you into service. You think you pursue joy. You are merely following the strings she pulls, like a puppet dancing to a tune you did not choose. And in this dance, countless lives are ruined, countless dreams are abandoned, countless souls are broken, all for the sake of a future generation that will, in turn, be caught in the same trap. At first, love arrives like a storm that sweeps everything in its path. It makes the dull world appear radiant, as if existence itself has been reborn. The face of the beloved glows with a light no one else possesses, and every gesture, every word, becomes sacred. You are intoxicated, as though under the influence of a drug that clouds all reason. In those moments, life seems to offer what it had always withheld: purpose, joy, and meaning condensed into a single human being. But this splendor is an illusion, a brief spark meant to deceive, for nothing burns more quickly to ashes than the fire of infatuation. The illusion is so convincing that you believe you have touched eternity. Lovers tell themselves that this feeling will last forever, that the ecstasy they experience is proof of destiny. Yet time, which spares nothing, begins its quiet work. What felt like a fountain of endless bliss soon reveals itself as shallow and quickly exhausted. The intoxicating joy fades, replaced not by peace but by restlessness. That feverish need to be near the beloved turns into anxiety about losing them, into jealousy when their eyes wander, into suspicion at their silences. What once felt divine begins to torment the soul. The very thing that promised wholeness becomes the sharpest instrument of suffering. Consider the fragile nature of this supposed fulfillment. Lovers cling to each other desperately, not out of true harmony, but out of fear. The fear that the illusion may collapse at any moment. They dress up their dependency as devotion and call their weakness tenderness. But beneath the surface lies constant anxiety, for they know, even if unconsciously, that this intoxication cannot endure. The intensity of passion is like the burning of a flame in too little oil. It flares brilliantly for a moment, then sputters and dies, leaving only smoke and darkness behind. Even the joy of union is inseparable from pain. Every meeting carries the shadow of separation. Every embrace whispers of the day it will no longer come. Lovers promise eternity to each other, but eternity does not belong to human beings. Instead, they are bound to time, to decay, to change, and thus every promise of permanence is doomed before it is even spoken. The illusion of fulfillment is precisely that, an illusion, because it offers what existence itself cannot grant. No human being can be the answer to your emptiness. No face can silence the hunger of the soul. Worse still, the illusion transforms the mind into a servant of its own torment. The lover spends hours imagining, anticipating, worrying. They replay every word, interpret every gesture, search for hidden meanings in every silence. Their inner world is consumed by the beloved, not because the beloved truly holds such power, but because the mind itself has surrendered to obsession. This obsession is not fulfillment but imprisonment. The individual ceases to exist as an independent being and becomes nothing more than a shadow orbiting around another. And when, inevitably, cracks appear in the illusion, the suffering intensifies. The beloved begins to reveal their ordinary nature, their flaws, their limitations. They no longer radiate the divine glow once projected upon them. And yet the lover cannot simply detach, for they are already chained. They suffer the dissonance between the image they once worshipped and the reality they now endure. They oscillate between hope and despair, pleasure and pain, as though caught in a storm from which there is no escape. This cycle, ecstasy followed by misery, is not accidental. It is the very structure of what we call love. If love were truly about fulfillment, it would bring peace. But instead, it breeds the opposite: turmoil, unease, dependence, and fear. The joy of passion is so fragile that it is constantly overshadowed by the dread of its end. Lovers cling tighter, suffocate each other with demands, and call this desperation loyalty. But the truth is that the supposed fulfillment of love is nothing more than a chain, disguised in gold, that binds one soul to another with promises neither can keep. The world praises this illusion as the highest good, yet behind the curtain lies only emptiness. For once the passion has run its course, Once the illusion has dissolved, the lovers are left confronting the barren reality they had sought to escape. They find that the world has not changed, that suffering still surrounds them, and that the beloved is not the savior they imagined, but another flawed being, as bound to weakness as themselves. And thus, the ecstasy that once promised salvation becomes the very cause of despair. To fall in love is not merely to enter into an illusion, it is to participate in one's own undoing. Love is not neutral, it is destructive, corrosive, and relentless in its ability to dismantle the independence of the mind. It operates like a disease that invades the body and spreads silently until the victim no longer remembers what life was like without it. At first, it seems like an elevation, a soaring beyond the ordinary, but soon enough it reveals itself as the very force that strips man of his dignity, his judgment, and his freedom. Even the strongest spirits, those who can resist wealth, power, or worldly temptation, collapse before the pull of desire. Kings have abandoned their thrones, warriors have forsaken their duties, thinkers have abandoned their clarity, all for the sake of another face, another embrace, another fleeting promise of passion. History is littered with the wreckage of men and women destroyed not by war or famine, but by the weakness of the heart and love. Empires have been brought to ruin not by foreign invaders, but by rulers who placed their beloved above their people. Great minds have squandered their brilliance not in pursuit of truth, but in pursuit of affection that could never last. Love transforms even the proudest into beggars. The self-destruction begins with a subtle shift. The lover no longer sees the world through his own eyes, but through the imagined gaze of the beloved. What he once pursued out of conviction, he now pursues only if it pleases the other. His speech changes, his behavior changes, his very identity becomes warped by the need for approval. He no longer acts as a sovereign being but as a servant, tailoring his every word and gesture to sustain the affection he fears to lose. His autonomy dissolves, and he becomes an extension of another's will, all while believing this loss of self is noble. But what could be more degrading than this voluntary servitude? A man who once commanded respect and carried himself with authority suddenly humiliates himself with desperate displays of affection, with sacrifices that strip him of his strength, with humiliations that gnaw at his dignity. He may call this devotion, yet in truth, it is degradation. He exchanges his freedom for chains and calls it love. What he does not see is that he has handed his very essence over to another, and in doing so, he has diminished himself beyond repair. The destruction does not stop at the level of dignity. It extends deeper, into the rational faculties themselves. Love clouds judgment so thoroughly that what was once obvious becomes obscured. Flaws are ignored, betrayals are excused, and absurdities are justified. The lover becomes blind to reality, incapable of making decisions with clarity. He may see the storm ahead, yet walks into it willingly because the thought of losing the beloved terrifies him more than ruin itself. Reason is dethroned, replaced by the tyranny of desire, and once reason has been cast aside, no action is too foolish, no sacrifice too extreme, no humiliation too degrading. What is most devastating is that this self-destruction is not forced but chosen. No external tyrant compels the lover to submit. He kneels willingly, offers his freedom gladly, and participates in his own undoing with enthusiasm. He thinks he is rising into a higher state of being, but in truth, he is tearing himself apart piece by piece. Love does not merely happen to him. He actively collaborates in his downfall, handing over his strength, his pride, his independence, and his judgment. The irony is that love promises wholeness while delivering fragmentation. The lover feels complete in the arms of another, yet in reality he has lost his center. He becomes restless, anxious, dependent, always needing reassurance, always fearing loss. His peace is destroyed, his stability is shattered, and his soul becomes a battlefield where longing and fear clash endlessly. He sacrifices the calm of solitude for the turbulence of obsession, and in that turbulence, he loses himself entirely. This is why love is more destructive than any external misfortune. Poverty, illness, or failure may wound the body or burden the mind, but love reaches into the very core of the self and corrupts it from within. It makes man complicit in his own downfall, smiling as he builds the very prison that will hold him captive. To love is to embrace ruin willingly, to set fire to one's independence, to call the ashes happiness. The The greatest tragedy of love is not merely that it deceives, not merely that it intoxicates, but that it enslaves. What begins as a spark of attraction soon grows into a chain, binding the individual to another with invisible shackles that tighten with every passing moment. It is here that the true conflict emerges, the battle between freedom and enslavement. For to fall in love is to place the very sovereignty of one's being into the hands of another, and nothing could be more contrary to the pursuit of strength, dignity, and peace. Freedom is the highest condition of human existence. To govern one's own mind, to walk one's own path, to act without subservience to another. This is the essence of autonomy. Yet love tears this from the lover. He no longer belongs to himself, but becomes dependent upon the moods, the whims, and the decisions of his beloved. His joy rises and falls not with his own actions, but with the unpredictable affections of another. What greater enslavement could there be than this? To have one's very happiness dictated by someone else's fleeting glance, their passing word, their temporary approval. The lover, convinced that he is free, is in fact nothing more than a captive. He waits anxiously for a letter, a reply, a sign of affection. He measures his worth by the attention he receives. His mind is no longer his own, for it circles endlessly around the same object. Even his actions are dictated by the need to maintain the bond. He dresses not for himself, but for the beloved's eyes, speaks not with truth, but with calculation, and lives not with independence, but with the constant fear of rejection. He becomes a prisoner without realizing the bars that surround him. The enslaving nature of love becomes clearest when one considers how it distorts priorities. A man who once valued honor, duty, or wisdom begins to compromise them all for the sake of desire. He who once sought greatness now seeks only approval. He who once pursued knowledge now pursues only affection. In the grip of passion, the highest ideals collapse, replaced by the singular aim of preserving love. Freedom requires strength, but love consumes that strength until the individual is hollowed out, reduced to a shadow of his former self. What is most deceptive is that this enslavement disguises itself as devotion. Lovers praise their sacrifices, their compromises, their willingness to give everything for one another. They call it noble, selfless, and pure. Yet behind this language lies nothing more than dependency, a weakness celebrated as virtue. What they call devotion is merely submission. What they call sacrifice is merely fear, and what they call unity is the annihilation of individuality. To surrender one's freedom is never noble, no matter how beautifully the act is dressed in the words of love. In truth, the only real freedom lies in resistance. To resist the lure of passion is to preserve one's autonomy. To see through the illusion of love is to remain master of oneself. It is not coldness, clarity. The world may call the one who resists heartless or detached, but in reality, he is the one who has escaped the prison that others willingly build for themselves. He has chosen sovereignty over servitude, peace over turmoil, and dignity over humiliation. Such freedom is not easily attained, for desire is cunning. It does not present itself as a chain, but as a gift. It whispers promises of happiness, companionship, meaning, and wholeness. It tells you that life is incomplete without another. And yet the moment you surrender, you discover that the gift was a trap, that the wholeness was an illusion, and that what you have gained is nothing compared to what you have lost. Only by refusing the bait can one remain unbroken, standing firm while others collapse under the weight of their dependency. Those who have tasted this freedom often find themselves alien to the world around them. They watch as others sacrifice their dignity for fleeting affection, as they fall into jealousy, despair, and betrayal, all in the name of love. And yet, though the free man may appear solitary, he is not weak, for solitude without chains is strength, while companionship bound in servitude is weakness. Better to walk alone, with freedom, than to walk together in slavery. The choice is always between mastery of the self and surrender to another. Love demands surrender, disguises it as virtue, and chains the spirit until nothing of independence remains. Freedom demands vigilance, clarity, and the courage to reject the illusions that ensnare so many. And though it may be ridiculed, misunderstood, or condemned by the masses who worship the cult of love, it is freedom, and freedom alone, that preserves the integrity of the soul. So we arrive at the bitter truth: what the world praises as the highest joy is, in fact, The most artful deception. Love seduces with promises of fulfillment, but delivers only servitude, disorder, and despair. It disguises itself as beauty while hiding the cold machinery of nature, whose only aim is reproduction, not your happiness. What begins with intoxication ends in chains, and what begins with hope ends in ruin. To fall in love is to abandon reason, to destroy one's dignity, to enslave the self to another's fleeting whims. It is to participate willingly in your own downfall, mistaking captivity for devotion and weakness for virtue. Humanity has clothed this misery in poetry and song, but no ornament can change its essence. And yet there is a path untouched by this deception. The one who sees love for what it is, the cunning snare of nature, can resist it. He does not kneel before desire, nor does he allow his peace to be consumed by illusions. He chooses freedom, and in that freedom, he remains whole. While others burn in the fire of passion and collapse into ashes, he walks through life unscathed, a master of himself. The world will never stop glorifying love, but you now know the truth it hides. The question that remains is not whether love is a trap. It is, but whether you will step into it willingly, or refuse its chains and preserve your freedom.